7:30 on Wednesday morning. A very good morning, everyone, and welcome to the newest edition of Liberties in Lockdown, a web series of the European Liberal Forum. Thank you very much for welcoming us today in your living rooms, studies, maybe even back into your offices this morning, which I really hope, to a new edition where we will discuss the freedom of assembly and the COVID-19 situation. The European Liberal Forum is the political foundation and think tank of the ALDE party. We are discussing in these days what is actually happening with our freedoms, with our liberties, whilst being literally on the lockdown. We have the big pleasure of welcoming a great set of speakers today and, of course, a fantastic moderator. But this is not all. Today's meeting is co-organized and supported by the Renew Group in the Committee of the Region. So Sean, the Secretary General, thank you very much for making that happen together with us. In the last couple of days and last weeks, we have seen unprecedented protests on the streets following an atrocity that happened in the United States that also sparked big discussions, big debates in Europe and other places, which also were followed, as I said, by mass demonstrations. And these collide with the general social distancing rules that we have in most European countries. We have seen protests before against the lockdown mechanisms themselves. And all of this begs the question, how do we deal in a situation where we are not supposed to go out, but we are faced with a situation where politics is affecting our life, or we're experiencing something so grave that we need to make our voices heard? And we have seen a couple of cases throughout Europe where democratic rights have been cut even deeper, like in Hungary, where the function of the parliament has been basically neutered. All of this needs to be protested by the people, otherwise the basic function of democracy cannot happen anymore. So this is just a snapshot and my personal take on what is happening right now. I have the big pleasure of introducing Giada Negri, our moderator for today. She is the policy and the policy and research, the research and advocacy officer of the European Civic Forum. Short lapsus on my side because we have almost the same job description and it's so branded in my memory that it's automatically coming out. So Giada, thank you so much for taking over today's facilitation. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you, Sean, and the Committee of the Region, the Renew Group and the Committee of the Region. And thank you to you at home. Giada, please take over.
Thank you for having me here and for the participants for being here and discussing this very important issue. I have two introductory remarks. First of all, the event will be recorded and live streamed on the European Liberal Forum social media. And second, feel free to leave any comment or question in the chat box. I will try my best to pick them up throughout the conversation. So yes, as we have already heard, as we faced this incredible COVID-19 emergency, we have all been asked to act responsibly as individuals and as communities. Authorities have faced a great deal of challenge in a context of complete uncertainty. As citizens, we have been asked to change completely our life to protect the lives of others. We have accepted a degree of restrictions in order to save people's life. But we have also witnessed with different intensities, but all across Europe, a general shift of power from the legislative branch to the executive one, a decrease in transparency and access to information and policymakers, new powers being granted to law enforcement agencies. In some countries, government have used this as an opportunity to pass laws that have been favorable to them, not necessarily linked with the health emergency. And parallelly, all across the Union, we have seen inequalities sharply increasing, societal vulnerabilities expanding, and grievances mounting. In this context, the right to protest and to peaceful assembly are essential tools to be heard, especially for marginalized and disenfranchised members of our societies. And it is even more important, I would argue, in times where swift measures are taken and other fora for participation and influence are restricted. National laws that have been passed to tackle the emergency have sometimes introduced partial or even total bans on gatherings, or in some cases they have allowed for wide discretion to law enforcement agencies that have also faced the question, how do we deal with the right to protest? But in a context that we have at the European Civic Forum have been monitoring for years of shrinking civic space and shrinking space for the right to assembly and protest. So it is with my great pleasure that I moderate this debate. We have Jean-Luc Vanres, who is a Citizenship and Governance Coordinator for the Renew Europe group and at the European Committee of the Regions. He has also been active during the COVID crisis, providing support to vulnerable communities and coordinating police actions. Milos Chodun, who is member of the board of director for the European Liberal Forum, and as well as a lawyer and an activist in Poland for the Polska Association. And finally, but not least, Ella Jakubowska, who is a policy and campaign officer for the European Digital Rights EDRI. Mr. Vanres, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Well, it has been said from the moment on we decide or authorities decide of a lockdown, from that moment on there is the question about what about fundamental rights, what about fundamental democratic rights. And I'd like to have this small intervention in two parts. The first part would be about really how to preserve the fundamental rights of the citizens. And we had a discussion, especially the last weeks when we had those public manifestations following what happened in the United States. We had these manifestations also in Brussels and Amsterdam and Paris and so on and so on. And there was the question, yeah, at what moment, what should be decided when the public decides to go in the streets? First of all, I think it's the first time in history where we have other tools of all the mass tools to express our feelings. Those mass tools didn't exist before, and there I think internet is very important. The use of internet is very important, and how to have a good democratic regulation of this internet is another question we should maybe discuss later. Another thing is, in fact, what we forget is that from the moment on we decide on a lockdown, or a government decides on a lockdown, this means that, in my view, the government distrusts the population in order to have a certain kind of discipline. And there you had different approaches toward Europe. We saw that actually in Sweden, decision makers said, well, we trust the population, we trust the discipline of the population, and we trust that the population will respect social distancing and so on and so on. I think at the end of the road next year, or maybe end of this year, we will see if this view was the best view, and if this trust in the population was really founded. The other thing is, we had these manifestations, and we saw during those manifestations, although it was asked to keep the social distancing, that actually it seemed to be impossible for many people to respect this. So this is really a very tricky problem. We also know that we are speaking about health. So normally when we have laws to help restricting abuse and data protection laws, it is not about health. And so this is the really particular problem of the situation here, is that we are having this health issue. Second thing is how to assure democratic decision-making. And there I think the example of Hungary has been given, but there are other examples where we see that in many countries, there was really no immediate reply about how to organize this transfer of competences of decision-making from certain authorities who had the competence to others. And there I think there are a certain number of principles we have to be assured. First of all is, of course, that every decision-making must be democratic. I have an example of my home country, Belgium. In the beginning, we decided on having the parliament having his meetings with just the representatives of the party groups. Of course, this is not the same thing as a normal meeting, but you had a kind of democratic control. It was also the fact that the group who decided on the measures taken, the special group was a group with representatives of most of the parties. So this is a tryout. Also, when we speak about subsidiarity in my home country, actually the regions, as you know, are very powerful, and the regions are actually ruling or deciding on the decision-making of the local authorities. And there were, from the different regions, Brussels, Flanders, and Wallonie, a certain number of rules where was said what authority should be transferred from the local authorities, city council, for example, to the executive, and for what period. And I think this is very important, first of all, to have a clear decision and to have a decision which is founded on democratic rules. So, because at the end, what we see is that the population, people need to trust the decision makers, and you can trust the decision makers when they tell you clearly what they decided, what the time schedule of the decision is, and also, and this was very important with the health issue, that the role of the experts is very important. So this time limit thing is, of course, very important, and we saw in some countries, for example, Hungary, where a lot of questions are asked about what about this this time limit? Is there a time limit? What will happen in the future? What about democracy in this state? The other thing is, of course, that decision-making should be participatory. So this means that there must be a participation. Local councils in my country did have their reunions through internet, and mostly they used Zoom. And there we have the other problem then, that is that at a certain point at the beginning, and I suppose this discussion went on in all the countries, it was about the credibility of these this network supports. Anyway, as democratic debates are public, I think it should normally not be a big problem to use those supports, even if there could be security problems. What is public is public. So if you can attend a council meeting, a city council meeting, well, you should have this kind of meeting also through other ways of support. So another thing is, and maybe that's a question we could ask ourselves later on, is that actually I have the feeling that the pandemic now is also used in other, or disused in other political issues. I'm looking to our friends from the United Kingdom, and I'm seeing that actually, while we have this Brexit negotiations or not negotiations going on, the money thrown around to fight against the corona is just implementing, I have the feeling, the Brexit issue. And I think these are two separate things, and population should be informed about the fact that the corona issue should not be misused for other purposes. I give just this example, but there are many other examples all over Europe. And then maybe at the end, what I will propose to do, we see as liberals that we have many problems with this transfer of authority. Why shouldn't we as liberals maybe try to make a kind of liberal road book about how to handle this kind of situations, because I'm afraid in the future we will have them again. And so if we have this liberal road book, it would prove that we had a democratic discussion about it, and that we have somewhere a source on which we can base our decision making. So I think that's just a proposal I make. We have something totally new happening here. How to handle these democratic challenges and how to address them. And there, what I propose is to just make this kind of road book, I would say a liberal road book protecting our democratic rights in exceptional situations. Thank you.
Thank you for this proposal and for sharing with us some of the experiences that the local authorities had facing this unprecedented challenge. You also mentioned the protest that started in the US, but catched up also in Europe concerning the murder of George Floyd. They started as an act of solidarity toward the struggle in the US, but also slowly started to demand for similar reflections to happen here in Europe on how policing works and how to keep accountable police forces for abuses. I was wondering if this sparked some kind of internal reflection inside the local authorities and police forces on possibly how to respond to these demands, maybe change, or maybe how to defend the work that has been done.
Yes, thank you. So this is a very difficult question, of course. As you know, in Brussels, we had also some manifestations going on. And well, I think nobody contests the fact that what happened in the States is just unacceptable, and what sometimes could happen in our countries, according to police actions, is sometimes unacceptable. And therefore, of course, there should be a public reply. And the fact is now that we have this health issue and just talked about it. And having this health issue, it's very difficult to handle this kind of problems the same way as we do in other, confronted with other problems. So the fact is, we have one thing we didn't have before. It's, of course, the possibility of use of social media. And I think we should seriously think about how to use the social media to transfer not the anger of one person or 10 people, but maybe the anger of thousands of people as we have in a manifestation. So I think technically this must be possible. But, well, I'm not a technical guy, but we have somebody here on the board, I think. But I think technically it should be possible to transfer a mass reaction through this internet, particularly in the situations we have here. Second thing is, and that was something I didn't know, well, in my country, Belgium, if you want to have a public manifestation, you have to ask the local authorities if you may do so. And then they can allow it or they cannot allow it. And of course, the person who's normally the mayor who allows it is then responsible for his decision. And in Belgium, head of the police is actually the mayor. So he's the person who says yes or no to public manifestations. and afterwards, of course, he has to explain his decision to his council. So that's what's happening in Belgium. But I know that in other countries, even in Europe, it's not the mayor or the politically responsible person who decides on the fact that people may or may not have a public manifestation. Sometimes it's the police. So, so first we have to see a difference between those countries who have this pure political decision about it and less political decision. So what I think is that, and this again is how can we trust the people who ask to have manifestation? That's the question. And there it is. If people accept that they will respect social distancing and so on and so on, I think it's no problem to have these public manifestations. But we saw that there was a lot of abuse in the last manifestations in Europe.
Thank you so much for your answer. I know it was a challenging question. Now I would give the floor to Milos Hodun.
Okay, thank you so much for having me in this panel. This is a real pleasure, especially that this is the last one of the series. So I have a feeling that I'm participating in something very special. And yeah, thank you for the first intervention. It was very interesting, and I would like to my intervention would be commenting, on the very same topics and issues, but I would like to comment from a different perspective, from a perspective of a government, or even more of an illiberal regime. And this perspective is very easy for me to understand and to comment, because right now I'm sitting here in my home country in Poland, in Warsaw, and where we have such an illiberal regime who is actually trying to get all the benefits of the corona situation as it can. And this is not the only one in Europe, as Hungary was mentioned before, but there is a few more. So I would like to give you this example of Poland, and then maybe build a conclusion out of it. So Polish government introduced very hard measures very quickly, already in early March, just after the first case of coronavirus was detected here. Basically, the country went on a lockdown, and our basic rights were very much limited, including the right to assembly and the right to demonstrate. And so we could not demonstrate at all on the streets of our cities and towns, and we could not even assembly in groups bigger than 2 unless there were families. So we also must look at this decision in a very specific context that we had that time, because March, this was in the middle of the presidential campaign we had here in Poland, a crucial presidential campaign that could decide about the future of this regime we are having right now. And the government decided to use this law, this extraordinary law, during this campaign. They had the chance to postpone the campaign to September or later, but they decided not to. So they decided to introduce this new measures during the campaign, limiting not only our rights to assembly, to our rights to demonstration, but also limiting this fundamental electoral rights, because without the right to assembly, it's not possible to run a normal campaign. So that elections are not equal, are not just, are not fair. Because elections, we must remember, it's not only the election day, it's the entire process and the entire campaign. And how can you run a campaign if none of the opposition candidates had a chance to meet their voters? Because it was only the president, the incumbent president seeking re-election, who could meet his voters, who could go to hospitals and so on, because he was a president. So the restrictions for him were not exactly the same as for everybody else. So this is the most drastic political consequence of this ban we had. But there are many more. And we saw it especially in May, when in May many groups in the society felt really tired and dissatisfied with the situations, and they really wanted to show how they feel about the crisis, about the government's response on the streets of their cities. And one of these groups were the business owners or entrepreneurs who were protesting against the lockdown, who were actually, begging for the economy to get unfrozen, and for more effective measures by the government. And this group, which was firstly like an ad hoc online group, was organized on Facebook, and but then they decided to go on the streets, and they actually challenged this extraordinary rules by the government in the court, and the Court of Appeals in Warsaw said that technically they're right, and the government cannot limit our right to demonstrate with this extraordinary executive orders, because we have our laws and we have a constitution, and the constitution says that we have this right to demonstrate, and this is impossible to government, so that the government limits these rights with this executive orders. So people went on the streets, these entrepreneurs, business owners, they went on the streets of Warsaw and many other cities, and the police stopped these demonstrations immediately with the tear gas, with people arrested, with people fined, with fines of 2,000 euros and more. Why? Because, and here I think we come to one of the most important things in this debate. So one thing that Jean-Luc said before is the fact that this decision must be clear and explain to the people why we take these decisions. And the other thing that we see here, because in Poland they were not clear, we didn't know why actually the government is taking these decisions and not that decisions. But there's one more thing. In Poland and in other illiberal regimes, but not only, these decisions are fully arbitrary. This is the government who decides which demonstration actually can be organized, can take place, and which not. So these entrepreneurs who were actually at one moment led by the guy who was one of the presidential candidates, a marginal one, but still an anti-establishment presidential candidate, were seen as the government as a threat. So they had to stop it with the all tools they had. And the police is fully dependent in my country on the government. Basically is supervised by the Ministry of Interior. So this is the guy, a politician, member of the government, who can decide which manifestations can go through the cities of Warsaw and other cities, and which manifestations will not go, will be stopped with the tear gas. And my association, Projekt Polska, we organized a peaceful demonstration 2 weeks ago, and it was perfectly fine for the government because they did not see any threat, any political threat from this manifestation to their political interest. So they can decide fully arbitrarily on which demonstrations are okay and which demonstrations are not. And yeah, because I see that my time is running, so maybe let just me give you here like this little summary. So I think that the one thing is to put the country and the society on the lockdown because you want to stop the virus, because you want to protect the health of the society. But the other thing is to use these measures, is to use the coronavirus, the crisis, for your own political benefit. And unfortunately, there is many governments, especially these illiberal regimes, who are doing exactly that. And my country is one of the examples. And our role as liberals is always to ask questions, and to ask questions, why are you taking this decision? Why are you limiting our rights and freedoms, or why are you lifting some limits? These decisions should be always clear and well reasoned, not arbitrary, because this is again our obligation as liberals to react when our rights and freedoms of the people are limited. We always must react and ask questions. And coronavirus is a great opportunity for illiberal regimes and some governments to fight against the oppositions, to fight against very basic rights of democracy, to fight against their people. And actually, I'm pretty pessimistic. I think this is a testing moment, and many of these measures will actually stay with us forever, or as long as these governments last.
Thank you for this introduction. So I think that the Polish case is very interesting to showcase how important it is to protect checks and balances, including the right to assembly, especially in times of emergencies. And Polish activists have found very interesting and creative ways to protest in the streets, because sometimes the internet is not enough to show dissatisfaction, but at the same time maintain the protection measures that are essential to keep us safe. Can you give some example or lessons learned from this Polish experience?
Sure, this is a very good question, and again, like perfect for Poland, since Poland for the last 6 years is a country of protests and manifestations, because with this government, Polish civil society really learned how to protest and how important it is to protest. So very briefly, I would like to give you maybe 2 examples of what happened from the creative perspective. So first example would be connected with the abortion ban, that the government wanted to introduce, or to, the bill they wanted to approve during the pandemic. And maybe you remember from previous years, from 2016, 2017, when the Polish government decided to ban abortion fully in the country. And it was stopped only because of the mass protests in all corners of the country, from Warsaw to the smallest towns. We had so-called black protests, or black strikes, and people and their will and determination, they actually prevented the government. The government had to take a step back, which was probably the first case in the history of this illiberal regime when they had to step back. This time we did not have this chance, because we cannot go on the streets, we cannot protest. This was illegal. So online was a one thing, but of course people have great fantasy, and we saw car protests. So people were driving around the city with posters saying, black protests protect women's rights on their cars. Some people were protesting actually in queuing to the shops, because going to the shop, even though it was the lockdown, the strictest we had, still it was legal to go to the shop, but we had to keep the two meters distance between each other. So we had like long lines on the streets, and some people were carrying the posters of black protests with placards for protection of women's rights on their purses, on their backpacks. So people protested how they could. But unfortunately, this bill was approved. I mean, it passed the first hearing. It will be proceeded in the parliament. But the first vote was as the government wanted. So we could not protest. The results are not as visible as previously. And there's one example I would like to give you more, which is very interesting, because it was made by the artists. So on May 6th, as far as I remember, a group of artists walked with a 14-meter long letter, a banner saying basically life must go on. And they were actually keeping the distance, 2 meters between each other. And they were protesting, they were walking from the main post office to the parliament, protesting against holding the elections in time of pandemics, which is dangerous for the people and unconstitutional. And so, it was creative, it was safe, because the safety rules were actually observed. But the police stopped them, and some of them were fined with the fines of, again, over 2,000 euros. So here we go back to my first intervention. So again, the government, that is afraid of artists, that does not understand art and activism, and was afraid that this is something that actually people may find inspiring and interesting, decided to cut it as soon as possible to prevent further artistic activism, even if the artists were taking all the safety measures. So yeah, there are some interesting ideas, and some of them work, some of them don't work, because again, we don't know the rules. We don't know when we can protest and when we cannot, because this is fully arbitrary by the government and the police that is supervised by the government.
Thank you, Milos. Ella, the floor is yours. I will ask you to stick with the time.
Thank you, and thank you for having me today. Good morning, everybody, and thank you also to my fellow panelists for the really interesting interventions. So I'm here today, I'm from Negri, which is a coalition of 44 digital rights organisations across Europe, and I work mainly on biometric mass surveillance and how it can impact freedom of assembly and association, as well as many other rights. So I'm going to try and take some insights from our work on biometric mass surveillance and talk about what that means at the moment in pandemic times. So as I was preparing for today, I was reflecting on the title of this series, Liberties in Lockdown. And it's a really great title because our liberties really have been put in lockdown. Lots of our fundamental rights have been restricted as part of the responses that our countries have been taking to this pandemic. But regardless, freedom of assembly remains critically important to our societies. And I think that's especially the case in how it can give people a voice in our economic and social recovery from this pandemic. And we've seen in recent weeks how organising for Black Lives Matter has brought some of these challenges to the forefront. And really the pandemic has brought a lot of awareness about the inequalities and the discrimination that were already in our societies to the front across Europe as well. And there's also brought attention to, as Milos said, abuses of power. So I think those issues are the things that should really be under our microscope, looking at why people feel so strongly right now that they need to protest. So when I'm looking at different COVID-19 measures, restrictions, especially technological ones, but really anything that our authorities might want to put in place, I have two overarching questions that I always ask. The first is, what does it mean for our fundamental rights? So the usual principles around necessity and proportionality, the need for measures to not violate the essence of our rights, so things cannot encroach on our fundamental human dignity as people, the need for really careful, transparent, strict limits on time and purpose. These things are actually more important than ever when we're seeing our liberties be so restricted across the EU. And then on a second level, I ask, what can these sorts of restrictions mean for our individual lives, for our communities, for our ability to take part in society and politics? So the main point I want to put across, and which we've learned from our work on biometric mass surveillance, such as facial recognition, is that there's a real risk that actions taken today can outlast the pandemic, and that we will see authorities exploit the current circumstances. Facial surveillance is very much on the rise across the world, and in coronavirus responses, we've seen Poland using facial recognition in the quarantine app. We've seen proposals in the UK to use facial recognition as part of the apps to respond. And these very same technologies we've seen in the US being used to specifically target protesters. So we know there is a lot of potential there to impact on people's ability to assemble more broadly, and also how safe it actually is for people to assemble. So if we bring in at this time more and more facial recognition and other forms of biometric surveillance, there's a real threat that it can actually impact everyone's freedom of assembly and freedom of association down the line. There's lots of ways that this can happen. One, for example, is what's known as the chilling effect, where people who know that they're being watched all the time are forced to change their behavior, are disincentivized from assembling, from taking part in political speech. And the more and more that these systems are put in our public spaces, they can get to really intimately know us, where we go, who we meet. So it's not just ourselves that are being put at risk, but it's our families, it's our fellow protesters. So this can also impact anyone that's looking to protest. It can impact journalists who are looking to report on protests and inequality. So really this accelerated introduction of biometric surveillance tools in a time of pandemic or otherwise can have a domino effect on lots of other rights violations, because if we can't assemble and participate, we can't have a vibrant democracy. If we can't have journalists getting access to what's going on, we lose our ability to get access to information. And in addition, we can have our privacy and our data protection rights really violated. And worse still, all of this can even more so impact those that we know are systematically discriminated against already in our society. And to really highlight what a risk these technologies can pose, we've had a lot of MEPs speaking out against them. And when there was a proposal for the European Parliament to equip some of their buildings with facial recognition, MEP Sophia in 't Veld spoke out really strongly against this proposal, which just goes to show how harmful it can be. And if we're not going to accept it for our elected officials, we shouldn't be accepting it for our people either. So just lastly, to illustrate this, I want to briefly touch on the different sorts of technologies that can be used for recovery, for helping unlock societies. Biometric immunity passports and body temperature scanners are two of the ideas that have been put forward to help us return to some sort of new normal. But these technologies have a very high risk of locking people out of society. If these passports or scanners say that you're not eligible, then you'll be prevented from working, from contributing to society, from assembling and expressing yourself in public. And this is especially scary when we know that there are real risks of false negatives and positives, when we know that not everybody has equal access to technology. If we're using apps, for example, what about the people who don't have or can't use smartphones? And worse still, the World Health Organization has said that there is a real lack of scientific evidence for either immunity passports or body temperature scanners. And yet that's not stopped private companies and governments from experimenting with them and trying to push them forward as supposed solutions to the problems that we're in. So I think this really illustrates why, when introducing any measures that could impact our freedom of association and assembly and expression, we need to be really careful about thinking about the long-term impacts and also who will be most impacted by them. So just to conclude, I think it's got a lot to do with trust. Yuval Noah Harari wrote a great piece recently about empowered and knowledgeable citizens. And it's really clear that people who trust in their governments, their police forces and their leaders will make better decisions. But this won't happen if everyone is permanently tracked and targeted by their states. It won't happen if people's voices to participate in recovery are taken away. So just bringing it back to the policing and local authority perspective, this for me is exactly why police and other authorities need to be helping people to safely protest and assemble. It's also why authorities must not abuse this opportunity to increase public surveillance. Freedom of assembly is such an important right for all of us, and when it gets restricted, we all lose out.
Thank you. Just a reminder for the participants that they can ask questions to the speakers in the chat box. Ella, thank you so much for what you said. It resonated a lot with me. You mentioned discrimination, and I was wondering, how has policing the COVID crisis affected communities that are already vulnerable, meaning people of color, homeless, migrants, and so on?
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think it's really important when tackling these kind of questions to remember that no community is inherently vulnerable. They are made vulnerable by the societies and the structures that we have in place. And so in the work that we do at EDRI, we've looked at policing technology and how that can accelerate discrimination. And it's very clear that when you already have unequal societies, which we know we very much do have across the EU, the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency spoke out just last week about the high levels of racism, discrimination and inequality in all EU countries. And so when we bring in technology where there may be a lack of transparency about how that technology was developed, a lack of accountability for who is then responsible when the technology is used, and an increase in power for private companies who are developing these technologies, what we do is we amplify these underlying tendencies, and we bring in technology that will allow authorities to even more target certain communities. And what we're seeing across the world, and including in Europe, is that those will be communities of colour, that will be migrant communities, and other communities that have historically suffered from levels of disproportionately high policing. So it's really important now as ever that we look at those underlying discriminatory patterns, and that when introducing tech, we can be very clear about tackling that algorithmic bias and those other issues so that they don't just get reproduced and accelerated through technology.
Thanks. I think that these are very important issues to keep in mind, not only in the tech world and the development of artificial intelligence, but also really in the physical policing. We have a question from a participant, Philip. He says, it is interesting to see how the confidence in political leaders has developed in different countries. Do you see a link between government approval ratings and the level of policing measures taken against the COVID-19? Feel free to answer.
I can start then. I mean, I think in all the countries in Europe, we saw this effect of rally around the pole, rally around the flag at the beginning. So people in general, in times of crisis like that, they felt it's necessary to trust in government, because they needed clear leadership, because we were facing as a, you know, as a society, as a nation, we can say, as a community, something that has never been experienced before. So in many countries, including mine, the approval rates of the governments went really high at the beginning, because people wanted to trust in somebody, in something, and had the leadership. So this was one of the reasons why the government felt so comfortable in introducing this measures. But I think this is not really this approval rates are not so important in this case. What's really important is the fear, and the fact that people, the societies were just afraid of everything that was going on, did not understand it. So they accepted the measures because they felt that their lives, that the lives and health of their closest ones is more important than democracy, freedom, and any other abstract values. And this is why many of the governments felt so comfortable in introducing this measures. The situation now is different, I think. Also looking at my country, people feel free now to ask questions and to point out these irregularities, like something that was accepted in March or April, like the fact that the government was buying the face mask without certificates from some countries. They were buying the medical equipment because they wanted to have it immediately, because the hospitals were not prepared, and they were extremely expensive. This was accepted in March or in April, but now people start asking questions, and this is also connected with the fact that we don't fear anymore so much of the virus, or I would say, like, going on the streets, that people don't fear at all anymore, because there is the social distancing is only in theory. But I think, like, other panelists, they also have some answers, so I'll just give them.
Yes, if I may, maybe I have to. Having seen what happened, there are two remarks. First of all, in some countries, you had an immediate, very critical approach of the press according to the decisions made, and in other countries it took some more time. So that's something we should at one point study. Why is this? Is there a difference? And then the second thing is, when you see the evolution, is that in the first period, everybody was looking to the central governments, to even international institutions, about how to handle the challenge. And at the second phase, there was more need to know locally what should be done, and what the local authorities should do or should not do. So I think it's quite interesting that to see how people reacted to this new sense of urgency, but also to see if our laws did help us in address this challenge. So I think it will be a very interesting and important effort we should do now in the next months, is in order to adapt our legislations, our initiative right of parliaments, and so on, to handle those kind of new situations.
Ella, there is a question for you, actually, that is quite interesting. It is, as liberal, we don't want to impose ourselves in the private sector, but on the other hand, some companies, are moving fast into the facial recognition, digital tools, without too much care about ethical questions. What do you feel is the balanced approach?
Thank you, Ricardo. I think that is a great question. And I think the distinction I would make, recognizing that reticence to impose ourselves on the private sector, is that Clearview AI aren't just violating ethics, but they're actually demonstrably violating human rights. We've had a lot of complaints to different national data protection authorities about how Clearview are violating our rights. So I think that that is a case where it does justify intervention. And at European Digital Rights, what we're advocating for with facial recognition and with artificial intelligence more broadly is that we do have these set red lines at a societal and political level where we as the EU agree on the uses of facial recognition software and other tools that will never be acceptable to us in a democratic society. And that would include some of the sort of things that Clearview AI are doing. But then once we have these clear red lines, that gives companies a really great playing field and a set of guardrails to know where they can innovate. So having that regulatory certainty and that level playing field is actually a really positive thing for business and innovation. And it just means that we're making sure that businesses have the freedom to innovate, but without infringing upon all of our individual liberties.
Thank you so much, Ella. There are a couple of remarks inside the Q&A box. Nigel has said, is there any real alternative to public assembly to protest? We can use the internet space as much as we want, but there is no obligation to a politician to even open their laptop. And they also ask, is there any constitutional means at the EU level to preventing abuse of power in the right of assembly? While Victor asks, how can we ensure that there is accountability at the local level if there is an overreaction of the police during protest? Whoever wants to go.
Well, first of all, if you want to be a member of European Union, you have to, there is a control, as everybody knows, and if a state is accepted to be a member of the European Union, he has to prove that he defends the basic democratic rights. So that's, you're not a member of the European Union if you don't show that you can protect those basic fundamental rights. So that's I think the first thing. Then the second thing is, of course, the problem. Why do you have a manifestation? You have a public manifestation because you want not only people, but also the political decision making to be changed according to what many people are contesting or protesting about. And the fact is that until now, the most effective way was through public manifestations in the street. Why? Because this was visualized in television and other, let's say, communication supports. So the thing is, and that's with my question, I'm not very good in technical support on internet. My question, and that's people will find solutions for that, is how can we create the same impact, image impact of a public manifestation through other means? That's actually the big question.
I mean, the right to assembly is clearly expressed in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. It's Article 12, right? So it's there, and as it was said just now, like this is also one of the preconditions of entering the European Union. The question is later, how can EU make sure that all these rights are observed in the states? And so here my answer is, one of the crucial elements of it is the rule of law, is the principle of the rule of law, and the independence of the courts, who can actually review, who can actually decide when there is a conflict between the state and the citizens. And as we know, in a few of the European countries, this is a big issue, that the justice system is not independent anymore, and it is fully politicized. So we have here a big problem, because the EU still has not found any solution, to change this, to put this, to solve the situation with the rule of law in some of the countries, so that the justice system is operational and independent.
And just to add to what my fellow panelists have said on the question of, is there a real alternative to public assembly to protest? Public assembly for protesting has a really long and powerful history. You look at the US civil rights movement, you look at women's rights movements, and there has been a lot of power in people gatherings. So I think it goes back to the point I made earlier about, rather than looking for alternatives to public protest, is looking at, especially at this time, safe ways to enable people to gather to protest. I think that online tools, whether that's tweeting, writing, petitions, can have a lot of influence and can be very powerful forms of participatory democracy, but they also exclude some people, and exactly as Nigel's pointed out, there's no obligation for politicians to listen. So I think they can be a complement, but I don't see them replacing that assembly. And I think being able to assemble is also a really great show of solidarity. And it's a way that we as individuals can make ourselves a part of something bigger, to be able to demand our rights, to hold power to account, and to take part in our democracy.
Thank you so much for all your intervention. I think that, of course, it's really powerful to have a new fora for showing grievances and demands, but public space cannot be right now cannot be replaced. Especially one of the rights that is connected with the right to peaceful assembly is that of being in front of your target audience, and I think that physical assembly is what provides this opportunity. Clearly, there are a lot of controversies on how to do that in the most, while also protecting people, especially the most vulnerable. That we will have to keep debating over these things, over these issues, while still remembering that there are a set of clear answers also given at the international levels in terms of what kind of roles do local authorities have in facilitating as much as possible this right. I would like to give the floor now to Daniel, if he is here.
He is here, and hopefully also you can hear me and see me again. Thanks to the wonders of the internet, sometimes that doesn't seem to be that easy. Thank you so much for this most interesting discussion. I think something that we should have been discussing maybe even a little bit earlier, as has been hinted to, when we saw the first demonstration against the COVID-19 measures with people who are desperate of potentially losing their jobs. But I hope just one thing in the end, and that is Miloš is not right in his slight pessimism when it comes to the prevalence of certain measures. And I really hope that we will rather go strengthened out of this process, as also has been hinted to. The last thing I can really do now is, we've said in the beginning, this is the last episode of Liberties in Lockdown, is to thank you very much for being with us, the speakers for this excellent discussion, for the moderator for the excellent moderation today. I could have listened in for a little bit longer, to be quite honest. But this is not the end of ELF's online activities. We are also starting a new series, which is called On the Agenda, which will start in 2 weeks' time. So please stay tuned for that. But more importantly, we will also very soon on the 25th of June have our Idea Accelerator. where we bring together member organizations to have our first full online conference, talking about what the future will bring. Is the pessimistic view of the future really appropriate, or should we really look positively to the future? Sorry, it is the 24th, not the 25th. Should we really look positive to the future, or is there danger lurking around the corner? What is the future of the industrial policy and other things? And what will the German presidency of the Council bring with it? So please stay with us at also next week on the 24th for the ELF Idea Accelerator. Stay with us with our new series on the agenda. And thank you very much for being with us, not only today, but through the series. All the best to you, and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.